Scott, this week, Six Flags released their Q3 earnings. We're going to talk about that on this week's episode of Green Tag Theme Park in 30. I'm Philip, and I'm joined as always by Scott Swenson of Scott Swenson Creative Development for this week's review of the big news and discussing why it's important to you, the listener or watcher, I suppose. So,
well, hopefully you're watching and listening, because if you're just watching, this is really dull because you just see two heads popping back and forth for quite some time. So there's that.
So yeah, Six Flags Q3. So this is the first earnings report that we've really had where we've had a whole quarter of looking at how these two are doing after, or these one now after the merger. So this is the merged report together. And the news is, I'm not sure if it's good news or bad news. There's a lot of details and nuances, and I pulled everything together, the call transcripts, the actual reporting files, everything, and we wanted to look at some of the big pieces, the big chunks. And I think the first chunk is just the overview. Then the chunk is what they're calling Project Accelerate, which we'll talk about after the overview, and then maybe some of our takeaways on it. But the big picture essentially is revenue is down and the per cap is increased, and October did really well. That's the overview. So the attendance was down only 0.7, so it's from 21.7 to 21 million. So we're looking at last year, the two companies combined brought in 21.7 million during the same quarter. This year, combined during the same quarter, it's 21. So it only went down, that 0.7 of million. And then the per cap, I guess you could say it was up, kind of, but last year, the per cap at Six Flags was 56.37, and at Cedar Fair it was 61.65. But this year combined, it is 61.27. So it's I guess the average is pulled up, but it's still less than Cedar, but significantly more than it was when it was Six Flags. So that's a weird number, but the total number is for revenue was 1.35 billion for the quarter with a net income of 111 million. So at least there's net income, and adjusted EBITDA of 558 million. So I think, again, the takeaway here is there's a slight dip in attendance, but the increase in per cap spending, and it looks like this is kind of in line with the other discussions we've had about the revenue over quantity kind of approach. And of course, we talked about this too with the increased ticket prices for Halloween and that kind of thing. They're trying to shift it up, which seems to be the more successful model if you look at Disney, right? So Scott, what do you think about just this overview, the brass, the 30,000 foot overview of just the numbers and the EBITDA and margins?
Well, considering, I think the most important thing that we have to keep in the back of our mind throughout this entire conversation is this is the first real quarter of them being combined. This is the first time that they've really reported as a combined entity. So there is no, we can make up baselines. We can look at the two halves of the current company, or not even halves, the two factions of the current company, and guesstimate as to what has happened there and what hasn't happened there and what it used to be in the past. Even like you said, just looking at the per cap, you've got a 56.37 and a 61.65 of the two different companies. And after they've come together, their per cap is 61.27. So does that mean, to me, that is a positive note? But again, we're comparing apples to aardvarks here. There is no baseline. What we are doing, in my opinion, here is setting the baseline. Yep. We're setting what the new, what is it, Six Flags Entertainment or SFE something.
Yeah, Six Flags.
Six Flags. What the new Six Flags. What the new Six Flags. What the new combined Six Flags / Cedar is all about. And if I were coming into it from the Cedar Fair side, I'd be going, oh damn, we're down. And if I were going to come into it from the Six Flags side, I would be like, oh hey, yay, great, we're up.
Yeah.
So again, none of these shifts or switches seem to be that radical, either good or bad. It's just kind of this is sort of what we expected. We've kind of averaged out here a little. based on per cap, I think we've averaged out a little above where we were before.
Yeah.
And as far as attendance, I think we've averaged down a little bit from where we were before. But again, if you've got one going up and one going down, you're still okay.
Yeah.
We almost every theme park I have ever been affiliated with, either directly or as a consultant, the pendulum constantly swings back and forth. Are we looking to have super high attendance or super high per cap? And of course, everyone wants to say we want both, but that doesn't give you necessarily marching orders as to how to run your company. So you have to make that decision as to where your focus is. What is your primary and secondary focus?
Yeah.
So here it looks as though, I think you're right. It looks as though they are either focusing on or happy with a higher per cap, but a slightly lower attendance number. And what that usually leads to, and this is, there's always exceptions that prove the rule, but what that usually leads to is a better guest experience, because you have fewer guests in the park, but they're spending more money because they're having a better time.
Well, I guess that leads into the next section. They're calling this strategy. So I think to what you said about this being the first baseline, I think that seems to be also their standpoint, where they're kind of like, look, we have a new plan. It's called Project Accelerate, and this is where we're going to go from here. So it does seem like they're kind of setting the future path forward, and they even put a name on it, which is always exciting when we have names to, long-term projects. So
stockholders love that.
Yeah, so everyone loves it. Yeah, it's like, so Project Accelerate, that's their new...
Stockholders in the media get really excited about things that have names.
Yeah. So it sounds like Project Accelerate is their 3-year plan. And essentially it is a few things. It is, first of all, to increase the attendance to 55 million annually, which again, we don't have the baseline, to Scott's point, but just for perspective, the legacy Cedar Fair and Six Flags companies drew 48.9 million in 2023. So that would be essentially an increase of 6 million, essentially, to get them to that 55 million mark. So that's the first part. They want 55 million guests annually, and they want a 35% modified EBITDA margin by 2027. And Zimmerman, discussed on the call and in various interviews this plan. He said, to harmonize our operations and unlock the full potential of the new Six Flags, the goal is to deliver 120 million in cost savings by the end of 2025, while reinvesting in guest experiences. And he said, while we intend to invest back into our parks to enhance the guest experience and drive attendance growth, we are focused on funding those efforts with additional cost savings across the portfolio. That brought up the question, of course, of theme park closures, so just also to clarify, a lot of the mainstream media and other news outlets are saying that he referenced park closures. Just to clarify, he didn't actually say that. What he said was they're doing a portfolio optimization. Now, that is generally code for closing, right? When you're optimizing your portfolio, that does...
How do you optimize your portfolio without eliminating something from the existing portfolio?
Correct. I don't
know how to do that.
I'm just saying he didn't actually say they were going to close anything, but he did say optimization, which is probably, and it is also, I think, smart considering the situation where, again, if you, we've just talked about, you have some that are, basically some of the Six Flags parks I don't think are performing as well, and it's taking the entire average down. So if you can get rid of those or transform some of that and use that money for investment, that would seem very smart. So what he specifically said about the closures, they said, from a strategic standpoint, we're looking at the potential of each site. He said, Zimmerman highlighted the focus on stratifying the portfolio, suggesting the company aims to identify parks with high value growth potential while acknowledging that some smaller parks could be valuable due to their consistent performance despite size and market limitations. But he just basically talked about portfolio optimization and the potential of each site and kind of assessing that. So that's where they are. This strategy does seem to be in line with what we've seen in other research, like the IAPA Global Outlook report, which said that many regional parks are pursuing cost efficiencies while targeting specific guest experiences as primary growth drivers. It's also in that report mentions how attractions face ongoing operational cost increases and must balance cost control with the demand for high quality guest experiences, which I think that's part that he didn't mention really too much in this plan, right? Was like, yes, you're optimizing your portfolio and doing all these things, but you're not necessarily accounting for like inflation or any of those things, or I don't know. But I think that's going to be their tough line. Like, how do they achieve the cost savings without negatively impacting the service quality, and also whether it can streamline without undermining the guest experiences? We've talked about before. I mean,
Yeah, and I'm going to go even one step further. Let's go back to the optimization of the portfolio. How do you increase attendance when you have fewer outlets to
correct
to generate attendance?
Yeah, that's a huge one. Yeah,
so that's a biggie. Again, I've seen this happen in theme parks over and over again, and that is they'll say, well, we're going to stop doing, like even within a single park, we're going to stop doing this event. But our goal is to increase our annual income by X amount. Okay, well, you're getting rid of an event that generates X amount of revenue, and now not only do you have to make up for that, but you also have to elevate above that. So it's a huge balancing game.
Yep.
That's why I say no matter what they're saying here, basically they're saying here's ground zero, and then they have to give a target, otherwise stockholders and the media get really sort of disinterested.
Yep.
And you don't want your stockholders to be disinterested. Yep. It's interesting because extraneous to this particular report, came across my social media because again, being from Chicago, WGN came up. And one of the Six Flags properties is Six Flags Great America in Gurnee, Illinois. And did they say that they're going to be closing Six Flags parks? No. Did they allude to it, just like we've talked about here? Yes. Mm-hmm. Are they trying to get the locals to rally behind the local park? Yes. Six Flags Great America has been part of the Chicagoland area since 1976 is when it first opened. And the only reason I know that is because I was living there at the time, and I was there in the first year. So it's been around for a while. It wasn't always a Six Flags park. It has been passed from one to the next to the next. But the other question that was raised in that article with WGN and some discussion surrounding it was, if they were to start to refine their portfolio, what happens to these parks?
Yep.
If you look back to the history, like Geauga Lake, for example, which was a Six Flags property, that was actually sold off to become housing.
Yep.
Is
there anybody that would even want to buy it to keep it as a park, or would you just turn it into or is the land more useful? Yeah,
exactly. And I think that's another thing that we have to kind of look at here, because I can tell you right now, knowing the traditionalist sense in the Midwest, especially in the Chicagoland area, if Great America were to go away, people would be pissed.
Yep.
I can't say that I still fall into that category. It would be sad for me because that was really the first theme park that I got to know. First theme park I had a season pass to, let's put it that way. But at the same time, what is the alternative? It's not like, okay, we'll sell this building that we're using for storage, and we'll sell it and they'll turn it into an office building.
Yep.
No, you can't really translate theme parks into something adjacent. It either requires it to be a theme park, or it requires it to be leveled, and you're basically buying the land.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Because you can't, the infrastructure does not, go from one to the other. Yeah.
Correct. And the reason I bring that up is, if they were to, and I think part of the reason they're being so non-specific when it comes to, are we going to eliminate parks? Are we going to close parks? Is because if they close parks and they sell them off, they're going to get pennies on the dollar if they're going to sell them for the land.
Correct, because they're not utilizing the asset essentially. They're really trying to convert it. Unless now there was some one points brought about how the ones in California, the land is actually worth more than the park.
And that is valid, and that is completely valid. But again, I'm going to also guess that the parks in California are some of the higher performing parks than
Not
some
the
of the
northern
parks.
ones. I think those are the first target would be the Bay, because like, does the Bay really need to? And like, you can get rid of one and invest in the
Valid.
other.
Are they? Well, that was my other question. Are there markets where they're actually competing with themselves?
Yeah. And we
And
have
in that
a bunch
case,
here.
yes, I think you can. And the nice thing there is, if that's the case, then you can take some of the assets and transfer them into the other park, the remaining park, and that makes it a little bit more. I won't necessarily say profitable, but it makes more sense than just scrapping everything and just buying the land.
Well, and they did already make a deal, to get rid of the land for one of the California ones. So it's not like, so then you're leasing it, and that becomes an issue, because then so.
Well, and they also are now tearing down the one outside New Orleans,
Yeah.
which has been closed since Hurricane Katrina. So yeah, that's a good one to sell. That's a good one to get rid of, because it's been dead. It's just dead weight.
Well, there's a few little fun graphics that they presented in the presentation, which is also cute. But I don't know. It's weird because sometimes I'm like, well, these graphics feel like they. Well, I don't know. Maybe the graphics feel like they're saying something different than what he was actually saying, but maybe I just misunderstood. But the first graphic it's called Project Accelerate Key Objectives, and it lists them from 1 to 5. So maybe they're not like they're listed in order, but maybe they're not meant to be in order. But essentially,
I don't think this is an order of priority.
Yeah, I don't know. It says like 1 through 5, and it's like enhanced guest experience is 1. Number 2 is margin expansion. Number 3 is disciplined capital allocation. And number 4 is IT system integration. Number 5 is portfolio optimization. I'm not sure if that's in the right order, because it would, if he's already talking about portfolio optimization, wouldn't that be like, and then to me, the crux of it is like enhanced guest experience, but like, what does that actually mean? It says invest in the guest experience, deliver a stronger price value proposition, drive demand. Okay. But like, how are you going to do that without demand? And if you don't have any money, how are you going to do that without capital? And they don't have capital, as he just said. And as they just said, what they're trying to do is create whatever synergies or blah, blah. So basically cost cutting to raise the capital to increase the guest experience. So does that mean that in the short term, it's actually going to be a worse experience as they cut costs, and then they, use that to invest in the guest experience, and then that's going to lead to market expansion, which then is disciplined capital allocation, and then portfolio optimization? I don't know.
In looking at this and having written some training courses in theme park in general, I look at this and I go, well, these are 5 points of duh.
Yeah, that's the other thing too, right? Isn't like, that every business?
This is theme park 101 is what this is. This is exactly what you're constantly trying to balance. And, putting it in a cute little graphic, that's lovely. But that's, again, I think they're spending an awful lot of time saying very, very little. Other than what I'm hearing is, here's our baseline. Here's what we look like together. They have to put out some goals. And if they're smart, they didn't put out goals that they're not 100% certain they can achieve.
Yeah.
And they didn't put out goals that they don't already have a plan for. But, these kinds of things, yes, we're going to make the product better. We're going to make it so that we get more out of our dollars that we spend. We're going to make sure that our capital allocation is distributed properly. We're going to find a way to integrate our IT systems, which should have already happened, quite honestly. Yes. Integrating IT systems is probably the lowest hanging fruit on this, from my understanding. And I am not an IT expert. I recognize that. But to get, computer system A to talk to computer system B usually is less challenging and less difficult. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's a great way. I will say that whenever I have seen mergers or a theme park has been purchased by another parent company or whatever, almost the first thing that happens is IT is radically cut at the park
Yeah,
level.
they did. There was just some points of clarity on that. They did specifically address IT in here. I mean, obviously it's in the chart, but they did have like a discussion section about that, where he said specifically technology will play a critical role in delivering a seamless and engaging guest experience. And we don't know that could mean greater interaction on mobile ticketing, virtual queues, possibly guest facing AI. They weren't that specific about it, but I will say, to Scott's point, that mirrors the other trends, obviously, like, all the Disney stuff, the apps, mobile ordering. And, they did try those, for example, they tried those automatic gates, where you put in your license plate ahead of time and then you can just drive up. So eliminate parking attendants. But remember, it wasn't working when I did it. So like, and they have mobile ordering, but mobile ordering isn't working because they don't have enough people to run. I mean, if there's only one person running your food and beverage cart because they can't staff multiple, then it doesn't actually matter if you do mobile ordering, because like there are too many orders and then the person can't, they can't
do
they only do one thing at a time.
Ordering at the same time. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So some of these kind of fall flat, if it's just the technology.
Well, and I think first and foremost, like I said, the reason that IT systems integration and enhanced guest experience are two separate points is because IT system integration in the first steps, based on my experience and what I've seen in the past, the guests never see it if it's done correctly. Integration does not mean coming up with new IT ways of doing business. What it basically means is, instead of having the Cedar Fair system and the Six Flags system, that we have the new system, which is one or the other or a combination of the two. But you just have one system that you have to maintain, manage, understand, so that it simplifies across the board. It also can actually, and I hate to say this, but can actually reduce the number of jobs, because they take it under one IT, IT system and one IT department.
Well, so I think there are actually two things here, and I think they were alluded to in different parts of all of this mess that they put out. The one is, to your point, the elimination of redundancies, which is called out pretty explicitly, but that's what you're talking about, where it's like, we had two, now we can have one, and that's less redundancy. But the other thing is the other half, which you talk about, which is, if we roll out this automated parking system to every park, that means we can reduce X amounts of parking attendants by X amount of parking attendants are not needed. So there's two halves: eliminate redundancy and also like use that. And I do think this is a case where I do think that, due to the demographic that they target with all these parks, generally skews younger. I do think that the app stuff is a good way to go, because it's essentially, you're like, Scott and I agree. I think that the Disney thing has gotten out of hand, and especially because you're targeting such a large generational swath with that. And, you're, again, like when my parents go, or grandparents or whatever, it's like, you're like, there's so much to learn just about how to use the app. I think this is different with Six Flags. I think that it generally, don't at me, but it does skew younger. And I do think that it's a lower bar to step over for people who are born with cell phones in their hands. And then it's more, a seamless thing for them to figure out how to work these systems.
Assuming that the new systems actually work. And
correct.
You've had firsthand experience that parking does not.
Yeah. So actually, that's interesting, because they do mention some of these things. But again, to Scott's point, everything in this thing could have come from a training manual that you give, like IAPA gives out to people that how to like run parks. But like, they do mention some of this stuff. So they say, like, staff our parks to operate fully yet efficiently without sacrificing excellent customer service, which is like a whole pile of nothing. Like, does that mean like, yeah, that doesn't mean anything. It just is saying, what you want to say.
In looking at all these are all very political answers. It's basically the good things are good, bad things are bad.
Yeah.
Duh.
Although it is interesting. it's interesting to me though, where they said season pass programs are the financial engine of our business. That's one thing, because we weren't sure they were going to really, really like, I mean, Disney has made it clear that they care less about season passes, right?
Mhm.
But it seems like Six Flags now is like, if they're putting it in their deck, they're clearly like they care about repeat people. But
Well, they've got a
and then the
park.
whole
They've got a
unique,
park in every drive time circle in the U.S.
yeah,
So of course, season passes. None of their parks really are destination parks,
correct,
with the
correct,
possible exception of like Knott's during Halloween.
yeah,
But for the
yeah,
most part, they're not destination parks. They
yeah,
are local parks, and season pass holders are guaranteed money in the bank.
yep, yep. And the unique high quality food and beverage is essential and increasingly valuable part of the guest experience, which is like Six Flags is infamous for having terrible food. So I'm
Right.
and one of those where you're like, okay, is that how are you going to fix that? And how are you going to step? But anyway, I don't know.
Well,
But
but again, if they can say that, then it means, I mean, that's an area that they can have significant growth in.
yeah,
Significant growth in, because as you say, they are notorious for
yeah.
not having good culinary.
Yeah, and I think that maybe it's what they mean, increasingly valuable part of the guest experience. To your point, that's exactly, they don't want to put a goal on it, but to your point, they recognize its potential. I mean, essentially, look at the great food that Knott's has. If they could, roll that same type of system out, then you have a whole culinary apparatus.
Mm-hmm. Well, it
But
kind of goes back to what we said when we first found out about the merger: is
yeah,
if they could take some of the quality that that Cedar Fair has, and some of the efficiency that Flags has, and put them together, it could conceivably make them all better. But I think they're also looking at it going, we've got to be able to put some stuff out there that we know we can improve upon.
yeah, exactly.
If they've got something, if they put something in their checklist of here's how we're going to improve, and it's already performing beautifully, you can't improve. You can't improve things that are already at the top of their game.
Yeah, you know what? That's a really good summation of this entire episode and story. Basically, nothing that they have said is audacious. Right? I think sometimes you get those strategy and it's called like what is it? Like the Big Hairy Audacious Goal or whatever. They're the BHAG,
Yep.
right? Big
Yep.
Hairy Audacious Goal, right? So that business term for having an enormous thing to set a vision, this does not feel like a vision at all. This feels like, like you said, like, duh. This feels like, isn't this what you should be doing? Like, isn't this literally the handbook of a first-year manager?
Exactly. Well, and you can take any of these things and just say, no one's going to say, we are going to try to decrease guest satisfaction. No one's going to say that. So these are all things that just make total sense. The other thing that I think is unique about these lovely little graphics is none of the graphics now, other than the specific, I want to go back. I want to quote this correctly. Talking about Project Accelerate,
Yeah.
the only things that are measurable are the 55 million guests annually and the 35% modified EBITDA.
Yep.
By 2027. Yep. These are measurable. Yep. Everything else is, these are what we're going to try to do. But from what I've seen, and maybe they have it internally, that's very possible, but from what I've seen, none of them are measurable. And the nice thing about that at this point is, if they prove to be successful, then they can come back with numbers later and say, here's been our improvement. We improved this, and this. And those things that they don't have actual data to support, they'll leave and let die because people won't remember it. No one is going to save this cute little graphic and pin it up on their fridge.
I mean, I will.
Well, you will, but you're a nerd. So
I'll be like, yeah. And of course, the last thing is they did call out Halloween specifically, which of course, so Six Flags saw very strong attendance in October, largely due to the Halloween events. And they mentioned that during the call, saying our Halloween and other special events continue to produce some of our biggest days of the year, demonstrating the differentiated and compelling family entertainment that our parks offer. Of course, that's the same thing that was echoed in the TEA report, that Halloween has become an essential extension. And we've talked about that before on Green Tagged. And it's, I do wonder, again, like you said, he just mentioned it, but they didn't mention, like, they didn't say anything specific. Like, he didn't put a goal out there, like, we're going to make Halloween longer or better or invest in it or increase the spend for Halloween. Like, he didn't put any goals on Halloween. He just was like, Halloween's important. And so I think from that we can take, they're still going to do Halloween, but we don't know, like, was Fright Fest Extreme successful or not? You know, we don't actually really know. We just, again, we only have the numbers. We just know that attendance did well, but like, was it worth the investment for the licensing fees? Or what was it? You know, what about all the negative press that was generated by them opening late at every location? And what about the gunshots and the violence? I mean, like,
yeah, basically they're saying that, or what I'm interpreting they're saying is that Halloween is not. It is an essential part of their business plan. So they need to keep an eye on it. That's all they're saying. And that's something that those of us in the industry who've done Halloween events for any length of time have been saying for about, 20 years. So I've done seminars, I've done sessions specifically on that topic. If you're not doing Halloween, you are leaving money on the table.
Yep.
And that was 15, 20 years ago. So it's just really, 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 really obvious stuff. And that's why I say this is a baseline. This is the first time they've actually reported. And I don't think they're saying anything wrong at all. I don't think they're doing anything wrong at all. So please don't interpret it that way. But I also don't think they're putting terribly high goals for themselves out there. So obviously, because I care about the industry as a whole, I hope that they're using this baseline as a great way to motivate not only their internal folks, but to motivate their upper management as well as their stockholders to stay interested, to stay engaged, to stay involved so that they can continue to improve. But I don't see this particular report as giving any real clear marching orders or giving us any real clear information that we should either be really excited about or really upset about. It's, here's the baseline. Let's see where we go from here. Well, I know where we're going to go from here. We're actually going to go straight into recording our green tagged Unhinged episode to talk about something completely different. So if you would like to hear what that's all about, go to Patreon, search green tagged. Is it green tagged Unhinged, Philip?
No, just go to Patreon/green tagged. Or just go to Patreon and search green tagged.
And you'll find us and you'll hear what we say after the show when we go, oh my God, can you believe we didn't say? Well, I'll wait until you come and join us. So on behalf of Philip and myself, this is Green Tag Theme Park in 30, and we will see you next week.